Moving to John chapter 1, verse 1 to 18. John does not have much of infancy narratives, but he comes with beautiful statement of the word becoming flesh. The prologue to the fourth gospel, central to our understanding of incarnation and Trinity. What is the significance of the Christian belief that God has become part of this creation?
When we turn to the Gospel of John, we don't read about Mary, Joseph, shepherds, magi, none of that. It's a very different, if you want to call it an Advent narrative. It's an Advent narrative written after great understanding of what Advent means. So the Gospel of John is very different. It is what could be called a post-resurrection understanding and then a narrative gospel like that. So very often the insights that the disciples had after is now woven into the story. So it's differently put. As we have talked earlier, the first three gospels are called the synoptic gospels. You look at them together. And John is the autoptic gospel. You look at it separately. So John is very, very different. But the moment you open that, NRK en hologos, kai hologos en proston theon, kai theos en hologos. I mean, anybody reading that text is pulled into the language of in the beginning. You're thinking of Genesis. Again, the idea of creation. But how different from Matthew? He gave a genealogy here. He's talking about in the beginning, God created. In the beginning now, there's a continuation of that great creation of God is continuing. And it, in a sense, the first 18 verses is a theological summary of the whole Gospel of John. From here, several of the themes that are mentioned here are developed in this beautiful, different gospel. And he begins to talk about a different language of logos. Now, the word logos used here, it's a Greek word, okay? And it was used among the Greco-Roman people with their own understanding. But remember, John is a very Jewish gospel. And so here it is the eternal divine word, which is a way of speaking about the pre-existent Jesus. And more than the Greco-Roman context, John is thinking from a Jewish context. Of course, the language is logos, is Greek. But he is thinking of passages in the Old Testament that talk about the word of the Lord created everything. Psalm 33 verse 6, Proverbs 3:19. By the word of the Lord, by the wisdom of God, creation took place. Or Proverbs 8, where wisdom is talked about, personified. And there were many other Jewish writings like 1st Enoch and Sirach, which spoke of the pre-existent wisdom of God that descended from heaven to earth. So many of these Jewish ideas are already there in the world of the Jewish world. That idea of a pre-existent logos, wisdom of God, which is involved in creation of the world. The word, because it says, and God said, so the creation of the world. So that explanation is coming now in chapter 1 onwards, that all things were made through him. Without him, nothing was made that was made. So this logos is not just an inferior understanding like the Greco-Roman ideas. It is God, because only God creates. And so very, very unusual, unexpected. You didn't expect that in the first three Gospels. All creation came through the Word. And the purpose of all this, finally, verse 7 will say, so that all will believe. And then he uses analogy of light and darkness. He's a light that lightens all. The word all happens several times. For all to believe, for all to see. And then he plays with this light and darkness, dualism, imagery. Then he'll talk about life and death. He'll talk about spirit and flesh. And then the first person to talk about human is John. So see the way John is introduced here before Jesus coming in the flesh. Just like John is introduced earlier in Luke's gospel. But how different? John, nothing mentioned about him, about his parents or whatever, because he's speaking about John as his role. He's a light. He's a witness. He's come as a forerunner to be a voice of the one. And when you read this, one of the most startling verses is verse 14. This is a shocker. The Logos that created the whole universe has now become, in the words of John, sarx, flesh, and dwelt among us. Now the word there at once, the dwelling, the language used there is a language of tabernacle. And any Jewish person reading this will be thinking of the tabernacle in the wilderness was the place where God dwelt. So now where is God dwelling? In the flesh of the Word who has become flesh. Now, he does not use the word Emmanuel like we find in Matthew, God with us. But see how differently he's bringing the same idea. God is tabernacling with humans in the flesh of Jesus, in the human. And this is a scandal. The word scandal actually means a stumbling block. To those monotheists who find it difficult that God can become human. But that is the startling, unbelievable, incredible good news. God has entered into our world. Especially when we begin to ask questions. God is there controlling, God is there planning, we say. And then when sadness happens, we say, why did God do this? Why did God do it? As if God is doing it, like a puppeteer. And it seems as if God can sit there and do whatever he feels. But we are the ones who suffer, people say. No, friends. This God does not sit there unfeelingly. The good news of Advent is huge. In the history of the world, in the history of thought, it's huge. God becomes human and enters into the world as a human, living, full, real human being. And we have seen his glory, full of grace and truth. And then he will say, grace and truth has come through the word. Yes, we have seen a lot of truth that has come through Moses, but grace and truth has come from the Son who has made him known. Look at verse 18. No one has ever seen God in the way that can be seen. Yeah, of course, in some ways we can see Moses or others saw God in some ways. But really, we have not seen God the way we have seen in Jesus, the one and only Son, who is himself God and his closest relationship with the Father, who's in the bosom of the Father, kolpos, the bosom of the Father, has made him known. How can we know God? Do you all want to know God? The best way we can know God is when we look at Jesus. He has made him known. So the fatherhood of God is revealed through his Son. Bring grace and salvation